Drawing 1 class, one of the main things we learn is we learn to think about form and space as geometric and structural. So when you look at something like a skull here, we have a pretty nice collection of cow skulls, one very nice horse skull, a couple of deer skulls, one dog skull. Don't ask me whose dog, I don't know. And what I'm doing here is a gesture drawing, but I'm keeping it pretty loose, but this gesture drawing is also very analytical. Right? So sometimes we might call this an analytical gesture drawing, and structural, right? And it's geometric, meaning that I'm thinking about the form that I'm looking at as a geometric form, right? I'm thinking about things like eye socket right here, and how, like, when you look at a skull, like a cow skull or a deer skull, you can almost imagine a cylindrical volume that runs between the two eye sockets, right? They're not perfectly aligned. They're a little bit more like, you know, like if you took 2 toilet paper rolls and then they're a little bit on an angle to each other. But still, if you imagine that as a volume, it helps you to understand why the eyebrow and the skull is shaped the way it is. This is the thing that students struggle with a lot when they're drawing, right? Is like if you see on almost any skull, right? There's a center crack that runs down the middle, a fissure where those plates have been fused, right? And that's center. But when you're looking at something on an angle, right? Here's a little quick demo about perspective. Okay. You're looking at a plane going back in space, right? And you have to figure out where center is. One of the things we can do is we can take something that we know about geometry, thinking back to your geometry class and some basic Euclidean geometry. Everyone knows that any kind of rectangle, well, not everybody, but most of you probably know, any kind of rectangle or square, right? If it's a parallelogram, well, then actually at right angles. If you take the quarter diagonals, right? The point where those 2 diagonals are going to meet is what? Perfect center, right? So then that can give you where horizontal and vertical is. So if you then imagine that, well, what if we had a piece of paper and it was on a tilted angle? Right? You see how this distance is longer than that distance? Or like this distance is longer than that distance, right? Because the paper is closer to us on this side, so we see more of that half than the back half, right? Right? That's a normal thing that happens in our perception of stuff all the time that we don't even notice. But the hard part is when you're drawing is to know exactly where that line should be, right? But if you know, simple geometry will tell you where that line should be. So the same kind of problem runs with this centering, right? Finding exactly where it should be is pretty important. Okay, so let's just kind of wrap up this drawing a little bit. Now I'm done showing off, and now we'll get to the stuff that I'm not nearly as good at, such as some blind contour. All right, to do a blind contour, all right. Okay, all right, and we have some really good examples up there. A couple of them are mine, but most of them are student examples. Like that one right there with the piece, that's not mine. That's really nice, a very good example. Okay, here's some of the basic rules for blind contour, right? First off, remember, you are not drawing your hand, okay? It's really critical that in your brain, you stop thinking about the fact that you're drawing your hand, because that is not our goal. Our goal is to draw the lines we see. It just happens that these are the lines we see in and around our hand, right? But we are not going to worry about it being a hand, looking like a hand, right? That is not the point, right? If it winds up kind of looking not like a hand, that's fine. If it winds up looking like an alien hand, if it has like 10 different fingers, where the fingers seem to fuse and become whatever, that's fine, right? What counts, much more than whether it looks like a hand, is do the lines look like you were really looking? Okay, so that's rule number 1. Okay, so the way it works is, get your hand in a position. There are a couple of positions that you're absolutely not allowed to do. You can't draw your hand like this. You can't draw your hand like that, or like that, or like that, right? Not allowed, all right? You have to pick a position where the fingers kind of overlap the form, so it's a little bit complicated, so you have lines that you can actually follow, right? Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, then, you look at your hand, you don't look at your paper. And you try to imagine, anyone remember like when you're watching cartoons and there'd be a song and there would be a little red bouncing ball to sing along to the song? Anyone ever remember anything like that from your childhood? Okay, thank goodness. Okay, well imagine that there's a little red dot, that it represents the absolute center of your vision. okay? So when you're looking, right, dead center, there's a little red dot there, okay? And then as your eye moves, right, that red dot is moving with it, okay? So you can track exactly where your eye is going along that contour line, okay? Then imagine that your red chalk is just following exactly what your eye is doing as you go, all right? Okay, so here's a little test. Let's see. I'm going to start right at this point, right at where my watch is. One of the things that's really hard for students to learn how to do when they're doing blind contour is to slow down, right? Because I'm actually going fast for a blind contour. I'm going probably about 3 times too fast for normal blind contour drawing. To do blind contour really well, you should be going about 3 times slower than what I'm doing right now. Like normally, to do a blind contour of your hand, like an art student should probably take about 5 to 7 minutes to do it. Now, first of all, as I was coming across the top back of my thumb, right, I was dealing with mostly external lines, right? Like I wasn't, like the line was pretty much just the line of the back edge, right? Because there wasn't much in the way of interesting internal lines. But now, as I'm coming around into the interior of the base of the thumb and into the palm, right? I have more, I'm really now purely into internal lines. Now I'm going to have to take a guess. I'm going to go right through my thumb, I think, to then start my next line. That's another rule about blind contour, is that it should be continuous, right? You don't lift your chalk off the page. So notice on this finger, unlike the back of the thumb, now as I'm coming along that line, I'm also kind of exploring the interior lines as I go. And that's kind of important because the one thing you can't do, you know, like it's really almost humanly impossible. I guess if you were super good at it, maybe if you had like just that amazing sense of where your finger was at all times, someone could do a blind contour where they just focused on the outside line first and then went back around and then just did all the interior lines. But I don't know, that's amazing. I would aim for, I would think that would be too crazy. So what you're seeing is I'm going along, now I'm on the second finger, right? Hopefully it kind of looks like I'm on the second finger. Does it look like I'm on the second finger? Kind of, sort of. But I'm also going inside. Another thing you might notice as I'm doing on the inside of the lines, right, that I often will lighten the weight of my line, right? I can use line weight to do a couple of different things. The more you practice, the more you can use line weight to represent changes of value. But in this kind of drawing, the main thing that line weight is going to do is going to represent hierarchy, right? That I can use darker lines for the more important lines and lighter lines when I'm either like not sure and I'm trying to figure it out, or lighter lines for what the lines I think are less significant, like they're more just kind of like very tiny light wrinkles on my finger. Some of you may not be as gifted as me in having lots of wrinkles on your hand, and I'm sorry, you'll just have to struggle. It is the price you pay for being young. Okay, I'm now onto my thinking. I'm going to wrap this up kind of quickly, just so we can finish it. That's way too fast, right? But just so we can. Oh, look at that. That's awesome. All right, so similar to like the one I did over there, I have a tendency to do that, right? Notice how, see how like all the fingers are squished in, right? Like I really left out, it was like this dimension that got really kind of lost as I was working, right? And that is fine. That is great, right? What matters is not, although that's a nice thumb. I'm pretty pleased with that thumb. What matters is not, you know, like how perfect it is. What matters is the process, right? The looking through and figuring out where all, you know, like, and really looking carefully at the line, okay? All right, so That's blind contour. We're all going to do that. And we'll take, we'll probably all do scribble gesture first because it's a little bit more fun. And we say, but at the same time, we'll all do better on the blind contour. So scribble gesture, and there are lots of, right? We've been talking about the word gesture for a while, right? And in drawing, we tend to use gesture not only as like an adjective, like a thing, or gestural, like what we're aiming for, but we also talk about it as like a thing, like this kind of gesture or that kind of gesture. And in drawing class, we'll come up with all different kinds of words to describe different types of gestures. So like in figure drawing, over the years, we've come up with, like, I mean, obviously there's a kind of gesture called a mass gesture. That's done just about anywhere. Like anywhere you go in the country, you'll find a drawing teacher, they'll use that term, mass gesture. And then we also have, you know, more linear gestures, and we tend to call those scribble gestures. And then structural gestures, where you're, like the very first kind of drawing that I did, where you're trying to be much more structural. Anyway, so this is going to be a gesture, and it's going to be primarily with line, and so scribble. Okay, the thing about a gesture drawing is it's almost like the exact opposite of doing a blind contour, right? In the blind contour, one of the main things you have to do is you have to learn how to slow down. And in a gesture drawing, you have to learn to go as quickly as possible. In both cases, the point is to get you to stop thinking about the thing, not worry about the hand, just worry about what you see, right? Not worry about the literal naming of things, not worry about, you know, whether it looks like the thing or not, but instead just get into the process of doing it. The phone. The phone is ringing. I will not be right there. So another important thing about a scribble or any kind of gesture drawing is do not be afraid to make long marks. As you might notice, I have tons of incorrect decisions along here. You can always come back around and change it and fix it. Like I put this finger too far over. Did you hold that point right there? No, here. There you go. Excellent. I was doing this demo in drawing class last week, and I'm like, I gotta buy a new watch. I still have not bought a new watch. Okay, so the point is you draw quickly, you just draw very loosely. At first, you don't worry at all where your lines are. If you can, one of the things you might notice is that a lot of my lines are kind of loopy, and so they are naturally starting to think about being cross contour lines, like that they're wrapping around things. And if you notice also that I kind of built the finger and the hand outward, rather than defining where the outlines were, right? And then drawing the hand from outside in. I was drawing the hand almost the opposite way, from the inside out, right? Does that make sense? So if you can think of it that way, like that you're drawing the hand, you're almost building the hand from the inside out, that you're using the lines that kind of wrap and loop, and they start to become cross contour lines. Like I said before, do not be afraid to make wrong marks, right? You can make as many marks as you want, and lots of wrong marks, and that is totally fine. Instead, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting closer and closer to right, if that makes sense, right? Like it is a process about where it's constantly self-correcting.
The one thing you don't want to do on a blind or a scribble gesture, actually not either one, but especially on a scribble gesture, is you don't want to settle on an idea, be like, okay, this is what I think the hand looks like, and then stop, and then pretty much just decorate the drawing from there on out. You want every mark you make to be an attempt to get closer and closer to right, closer to figuring out what was wrong. Like you noticed I moved my fingers around as I went, I changed the position, the angles, all the way through the process. Okay. Any questions? Everyone feel confident? You guys are so... Okay, you can do this. All right? We're going to start with the scribble gesture.